So welcome again, everyone, and good evening. This beautiful June evening. So we're talking and dialoguing about equanimity. We've visited this topic a few times in the last 6 or so months. I take a slightly different angle on it as I sort of thought about it. I thought about it throughout the week and thought about it in relation to the talk and dialogue we had regarding what was going on with the racism in the world and what's going on with the pandemic in the world, economic uncertainty that's from that, and so on. And sort of this aspiration, I guess, that keeps bubbling up inside me to, want to act in the world, to be of service in some way, and how that fits with equanimity. Because there's always questions I find when there's talks about equanimity around what it actually means in terms of, what then do we do in the world if we're just accepting everything as it is. And I alluded to that a little bit in the guided meditation when I talked about accepting all the senses that arise, the sensory experience that arise, but that doesn't mean that you sit and with pain in your leg. You're open to that experience of pain in the leg, but then at some point you do something to alleviate that pain. And I'll talk a bit more about that and put some more context and to that idea. So we're going to talk about what equanimity is, what it isn't, how to cultivate it, and how it can support compassionate action in the world. So pretty much those four things: what is it, what it isn't, how we cultivate it, and how it can support compassionate action in the world. I won't sort of talk too much about what it is because we've done that, but there are some that may not have heard those talks, so I will touch upon it. In Pali, the language of the Buddha, it's upekkha, and you've perhaps heard that word with regards to the four Brahma Viharas. The last one being equanimity. So it's highly valued in the teachings of the Buddha. It's the last of the 7 factors of awakening, which we're just concluding here with this talk. It's the last of the 4 Brahma Viharas, and it's the last of the 10 paramis. And it's also the result of the 5 spiritual faculties. So it has it's highly valued, and it kind of has this concluding element to it. After you've done all this other stuff, it seems to be what comes to fruition. Really a taste of freedom in many ways. It's not freedom itself, but it's very much that taste of freedom. Two sayings that I often use when I teach, particularly when I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, is one saying is, we can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. Perhaps you've heard that in different contexts. We can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. I just love that. In fact, I used to give talks, and that would be the title of it. If a government department would ask me to come in and give a talk on mindfulness, that's often the title I would give it. We can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. And the other one is, with mindfulness, we can respond rather than react. Is another one. With mindfulness, we can respond rather than react. And those two really fit together very closely, I think. At least that's what occurred to me this week. and so and I think it, and they also very much connect to the notion of equanimity. So equanimity, I'll give you perhaps a metaphor before I get into conceptual definitions. Think of a surfer. We'll stick with that surfing metaphor. Someone is a surfer, and they're an expert surfer, and they're out surfing on a wave. They're in perfect balance in order to stay on the surfboard, and they're in changing conditions. So they're accepting whatever comes at them, but they're constantly moving in response to those changing conditions. There's nothing static. They're not just standing rigid on the board. They're constantly moving and adapting to those changing conditions. And they're not trying to stop the waves or changing the waves. A wave doesn't come and they go, well, I wish this wave would change so that then I could surf it this way. They adapt to the way the wave presents itself, right? That's what surfing is all about. In fact, many sports, I think we're attracted to them for that reason, is we're putting ourselves in situations where we're adapting to conditions, skiing, whatever it might be, or the conditions are shifting and we're constantly moving in response. So that gives you a flavor for what equanimity, balanced, evenness, given the ups and downs in life. So it's kind of this going with the flow, as could be another way to put it. I've mentioned that one before. My father likes that one in terms of a kind of slogan, almost, to remind him to keep balanced when things might not be just as he would like them. So going with the flow, that steadiness, balanced. That's what equanimity is. Being okay with whatever arises in our sensory experience. So that kind of non-judgmental acceptance that are used, that all has the flavor of equanimity. That's Rocky. Not sure he's being so equanimous right now, but so it's a quality of mind. It's a quality of mind we cultivate, much like we cultivate loving kindness, compassion. The way we can cultivate equanimity, and it can be a very refined quality of mind, and can be actually even at times hard to recognize. Other statement I heard regarding equanimity that resonated with me by Dr. Howard Turman. Howard Turman's was the spiritual advisor to Martin Luther King. And if you look up some of his quotes, he has many quotable quotes in terms of living a spiritual life. And he said, it is seeing the world with quiet eyes. Seeing the world with quiet eyes. So there's that kind of steadiness, quietness that's to it, that has that aspect to it. So as I said, it's a direct taste of freedom that all these teachings are pointing to. So when we say, we have a taste of what feels like, this is really what we're talking about, equanimity. This steadiness, and spaciousness. I use that. I think I use balanced and spacious and the notion of space in the guided meditation. So it's being okay with all of it, with whatever the entire space bits, but the entire space of your experience, whatever is arising as experience for you, we accept it. We're balanced in the face of it, because when we accept it, we can then be balanced in the face of it. And it allows us to really see things as they are, which is, again, what so much of what this practice is about. So that's what equanimity is. What it isn't, it's not suppression or denying. So it's not based on fear or aversion. We're not trying to get rid of something. So if a sensory experience arises, we're not trying to, well, that's not really happening, or I'll stuff it down, or I'll try to move that away, and then be okay. So it's not this. It's got nothing to do with aversion, or trying to push away, or suppress, or deny any aspect of our experience. It's not apathy or indifference. So it's not a withdrawing from reality. It's not pulling away from the world and not dealing with what's happening or what needs to be done. Right? So it's not apathy, it's not indifference. So it does have an action element to it. Another way to say what it is, in contrast to apathy or indifference, is it's non-interference with the natural flow of our sensory experience, right? So the five usual senses plus the mind. So it's non-interference with the natural flow of sounds, thoughts, body sensations, tastes, smells, seeing. Non-interference with that natural flow, with nature arising, as we've said in the past. Now, apathy is indifference to the outcome of events. And so they may sound a little similar, but they're actually opposites. In many ways, they're opposites. Because one's dealing with events, the other's dealing with sensory experience. Now, so equanimity can free up energy so we can deal with the conditions that are arising clear-mindedly, in a sense. Right? Because experience is flowing freely when equanimity is present, right? There's non-interference with the free flow of our experience. So when I say experience, I mean our sensory experience. So because it's flowing freely, we're feeling what's going on. We're in tune with what's going on. And we can respond with all that information. We can respond wisely. We can do what's required in that moment. We're in the moment. Sensory experience is flowing freely, non-interference. We're getting all this information because we're open to it. We're not pushing away and grasping. We're just open. We can use all that information to respond in a way that's appropriate to the situation. Not driven by fear, or not driven by reactivity, not frozen by fear, simply responding spontaneously to what's arising. So you could say it's kind of hands-off when it comes to the flow of sensory experience, just letting it flow, but it's very much hands-on with conditions. So you are dealing with conditions. So take pain. Pain's perhaps an obvious one. If we experience pain and we struggle against it, even though we can't change it, we add suffering. Now, if we're equanimous or there's equanimity with the pain, it still hurts, but we don't add suffering to it. And it might even diminish as we soften around it. Because when there's a tightness around it, it can actually exacerbate the pain. So this allowing can actually, the pain can actually diminish with the softening around it. So there's an example of how we can relate with equanimity to pain. Now, pleasure, it's similar. So if we're equanimous or there's equanimity with pleasure, it feels, it satisfies you. We've talked about that. Joy is meant to be enjoyed. And you're free from the suffering of losing it, the fear of losing it, or being unhappy when it changes and inevitably goes away. Because the pleasurable condition is never permanent. It will go away. So you're free of that suffering. It can feel good, you can enjoy it, so it can be satisfying, but you're free of the suffering of getting lost in it or feeling unhappy when things change. I'm going to read a fairly long quote from Shinzin Young. His name is Shinzin Young. Many people get confused about what equanimity is and what it isn't. Here are some examples that may clarify. Equanimity can be deepened by relaxing tension around pain, such as the pain of a broken leg. But equanimity does not mean that you don't care about getting proper medical attention, such as a cast. Equanimity means opening to angry sensations that may arise during an argument. But equanimity does not mean that you should stay in a bad relationship. Equanimity means developing greater acceptance with unpleasant noises in your environment, but it does not mean that you can't plug your ears or move to another room. What do all these examples have in common? You'll notice that equanimity is a relationship to sensory experience. It's not a relationship to objective conditions. Letting objective conditions come and go without trying to improve them is indifference. Indifference and equanimity may sound similar, but they're actually opposites. Having equanimity with the way a situation makes you feel frees up energy to respond to that situation in an empowered, effective way. Which quote from a talk that Shin-Zing Young gave. It points to how we can be open to the flow of experience, but also respond to conditions. And that's really the slogan. I'm just getting a message that my internet connection's unstable. Hopefully I'm still here. Yeah, and so that the slogan, we can respond rather than react. This is what it's pointing to. If we're not open to our experience, we're constantly being reactive, right? something, we want more, we're reactive, we try to grasp at something happens that we don't want. We're reactive, and we try to push it away. So we're never coming from a balanced place of responding. It's just this being jerked to and fro by the worldly winds, being blown to and fro by the worldly winds. So there is this aspect of responding rather than reacting. Another favorite quote of mine is Viktor Frankl, one that I've often read. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So when there's equanimity, there's that space between stimulus and response. When there's no equanimity, there's no space. It's simply stimulus, react, stimulus, react. And it's in that space, and you can actually sense into that space in your daily life and in your meditation as sensory experience arise. And notice when there's an okayness with it, that there is this space within which a wise action or non-action can arise. The quote says, in that space is our power to choose our response. I would say in that space, options arise. The notion of choice has too much of an aspect of us as an I or self that's doing. So in a sense, there's this space, and new options arise into that space. And then a choice of one of those options arises. And you can really get into kind of battling debates on this kind of, which I've done with a couple of teachers, but the choices are arising, and a chosen choice arises as opposed to you choosing. So that's another talk. So the idea, it's the ability to see without being caught by what we see. Right, that space gives us there's this seeing that occurs because we're not caught with what we're seeing. We're just okay with what's arising. So how do we cultivate equanimity? How do we learn to surf with whatever is in our experience? Well, actually, it's probably not all that dissimilar from surfing, in the sense that there's a process. Well, it's dissimilar in that it's a completely different skill, but it's similar in that it is a skill, that it can be trained, and that there's a process to training it. So you don't learn to surf. You learn to surf likely by doing steps. You hear about how surfing works. You might hear somebody give you a talk, or you might read something that talks about where you stand on the board and how you move around on the board, so you get a cognitive idea of what surfing might look like. You might even visualize it. Then you might stand on the board on land and move around, where the conditions are controlled, kind of like meditation. Conditions are controlled in meditation. Put your board on the beach and kind of move around on it and pretend you're on a wave. Meditation, you're sitting, being okay with whatever arises, pretending this is real life, but it's just, you're controlling the environment. It is life, but it's a controlled environment. You might even, start to get some pointers from teachers as you're moving around on land. And then of course, eventually you get out there on a smaller wave and test out your skills. I really do think, you cultivate many of these skills in a very similar way. You cultivate equanimity by developing the skill and by practicing it in meditation and in life. It emerges as the last of the 7 factors. We've just spent so many weeks talking about the 7 factors, and it emerges as the last one. And as I said, the 7 factors of awakening are a list that's progressive. They're meant to build one upon the other. And so this is the last one. So you could say we cultivate it by building, by moving through these 7 factors, starting with mindfulness, investigation, effort, tranquility, calm, concentration. Two things personally that I think have contributed to equanimity in my life are really seeing perceptions and experience arises, and really being present for that moment of contact, where the sensory experience is known, and it's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral arises. And really honing in on that moment, because as soon as you have a sensory experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral arises, well, the next thing happens is craving. This is all the 12 links of dependent origination, and it's described so much in the Buddha's teaching, this notion of contact, craving, clinging. So contact is just sensory experience arising. Craving is your preference arising. And so a sound which you then label as noise, perhaps annoying noise that you wish would go away. So there's your preference. Your preference is, your craving is the aversion, which is a form of craving. You crave for that sound to be absent. So that's your preference. Now that moves into clinging or attachment, when you just ruminate about, well, that sound is ruining my my meditation. This is terrible. What a terrible sound. The stories and so forth that arise, and then you've got clinging and attachment and suffering. So investigating that movement has been very helpful for me in seeing where I'm not accepting what's arising in my experience, where there isn't equanimity, and I can really kind of see why, or how perhaps not why, but how it's occurring, where I'm stuck. What's the belief? We talked about there's a believed thought. What's the believed thought here? It's causing me to be attached. Attached meaning I need this to be happy, or don't need this to be happy. Whatever it might be. So that's important to kind of get the idea of it goes from experience, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, preference, attachment, and really getting clear of that whole process and seeing how it plays out in your being, in your life, can really, really help cultivate equanimity. And the other part personally, just raise one more, is the the ethical trainings. I find it, if my ethical behavior strays at all, it comes up and throws me off. And there's thought patterns that continually come up around that. There's a remorse that may arise and so on. It doesn't have to be much for it to have a ripple, to disturb the balance. I was at a friend's. We're starting this social circle bubble idea, where you take a few. So we've got two friends that are also being very careful, and we're going to start a little social bubble. So we got together, and one of them is highly allergic to wasps, and there was a wasp in the house. So I grabbed a paper towel and I was going to grab the wasp. Whether the intention was to kill it, I think the intention was to gently grab it and let it go outside. And the mind was just going, you got to get this wasp before it stings your buddy. So that was where I was headed. Compassionate action. His partner basically, she says, "Oh no, don't kill the wasp. I've got a cup and a piece of cardboard that I use to catch insects." She catches it on the window and then slides the cardboard in and takes it outside. Sounds minor, but that little ripple of unethical, of harming a wasp, caused a ripple, and it would come up and come up and come up. So it threw off the balance of equanimity. So it may seem like a minor example, but it still caused this ripple, the do no harm teaching. How are we doing? Okay. So seeing our attachments, and attachment is being the direct of equanimity. Why don't Buddhists vacuum in the corners? Because they don't have attachments. There you go. I see some heads shaking, some laughter. Do not have attachments. Well, at least that's the that's the practice, is to let go and see through our attachments. So when attachment is not present or clinging is not present, upadana is the Pali word. There's clear, spacious seeing and equanimity that can arise. And these aren't easy to see because they're ingrained over decades of habits. Questions? I'll open it up for questions and comments. I saw some people go. Yeah.
I have a question. So earlier you had said concerning equanimity, something to the, well, anyway, something about, you know, let happen what happens. Like, do not, if you have the pain, do not be afraid of the pain. Have the pain, I paraphrase. Like, do not be afraid of this or that. But what if the thing that you're experiencing is fear? Like, that's the thing that you're experiencing. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a specific question, but I want an answer.
So fear being an emotion based on a confluence of whatever's happening and then the thoughts that go with it. So in the practice would be to open to the sensory experience of fear as best we can. Now, I've said before, if something's overwhelming, we can put it aside for another day and practice compassion, right? So it doesn't mean we dive into every emotion that arises and open to it and experience it. We may just approach it little by little, right? Or we may just set it aside for another day. So having said that, that's a possibility, right? The possibility is to set it aside for another day. If we feel that we can open to it, then we open to the sensory experience of the fear, to what's arising. And in fact, when we open to fear, fear is so much behind a lot of where we're stuck. When we can open to our fear, we can have some real breakthroughs in this practice. Opening into fear can really kind of capture the grace of this practice, can shine through in those moments when we open to fear. And again, it doesn't mean we don't change objective conditions. We're opening to fear. You know, perhaps we're afraid because somebody's going to hurt us. So we do what we need to do to protect ourselves, right? We're opening to the fact that there's fear, and it's sending us a message. I mean, we have fight, flight, you know, as a biological mechanism to survive. So it doesn't mean we just sit there and go, I'm going to open to fear and do nothing. We open to the emotion, but then we will most likely act in the world, but we may avoid being frozen by it. We can become frozen by fear. Shanti tells a story where he was a rock climber for a while, and he was climbing, and he was the lead climber. And the lead climber is the one that has to put the little peg in the little crevices. And so, and then you put your weight on that peg, and if the peg doesn't hold, you fall whatever length of rope you just left, plus you double that, because now you have to fall past the other person to the next peg. So the next peg grabs you. So if you've gone 10 feet, you'll fall 20 feet. So it can be kind of, there's an element of fear, you know, as you put that peg in. He got to a point on the rock where the crevice wasn't quite big enough in his mind that he could grab it, but it was too big to put a peg, and he couldn't go back. And he said he feared, just this intense fear arose, and he just stood there and he couldn't move. And he stood there for so long that he started to feel weak. Like if he stood there much longer, he was going to drop. and possibly die. I think he said he was 20 feet above, so a 40-foot drop, maybe slam into the rock. In that moment of acceptance, that fear was present, action just started to happen. It was almost spontaneous. He just started to move. He knew he had to move. There was really no choice. Fear had frozen him. By opening to the fear, he realized he had to move, and movement just started to occur. And it really, he said, it wasn't really like I was even doing the movement. It was just movement was occurring, as if, and I don't know if you've ever had that experience when you've been in a situation of intense fear and you open to the moment and something else just kind of propels you through that event. It happens with public speaking. It's happened to me with public speaking, where I've froze up on a stage. 350 people showed up to a talk that I expected 12 to. So, and the counselors and media and cameras, and I expected a group like this, right? A friendly crowd of fellow practitioners, 350. I didn't have a talk for 350 people. I had a nice little chat for, a dozen people. So and then something just kind of flowed through me that started to talk. And it was almost like I wasn't talking, there was just talking occurring. But it was because I opened to the fear. And what I did, I actually stood on the stage and I started to scan my body. I grounded myself in what was happening in my moment. And I even voiced feeling tightness in my stomach, feeling this. I even said it out loud. And in fact, when they recorded it, they cut all that out because they thought I was having some kind of breakdown. So they cut all that part out. But for me, I think that was the biggest teaching of the whole night, was me being so fearful and then kind of working through it live and in front of everybody. But at any rate, the camera guy didn't sort of get that part of it. But it was this, as if speaking was just occurring. And that can happen when we open to fear. So it's kind of like, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, it's Buddha nature doing the walking. I don't need to do the walking. He's got a gata. I don't need to do the walking. I don't need to do the breathing. Let the Buddha do the walking. Let the Buddha. And he's pointing to this idea of just allowing the spontaneous, whatever you want to call it, to flow through. And that's the same as that awareness that I keep pointing to. That deeper sense of being.
So in your example, which is great, thank you, versus the rock climbing example. So the rock climbing example was, we're talking about life and death, really, right? So, and that's a fear. And in your fear, I would assume that when you were on that stage, these were emotional fears. Oh, they're going to think I'm stupid, or I'm unprepared, or these are reflections of your, let's say, ability, right? These are emotional, like they'll think I'm an idiot kind of thing. And versus, oh my God, I could fall and die, like quite different. But are you saying still the same approach? Like go into the fear, yeah.
Kind of another example that wasn't life and death, it's the same approach, opening to the fear.
Thank you.
Opening to the fear, as best we can, again, as best we can in that moment, with compassion as well. with self-compassion as well.
Thank you.
Right. Don't always just dive right into our fear. Yeah.
I've got two questions that have been sitting in my mind on equanimity for a while. And they're kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum. One is a very real life kind of everyday, and the other one's at the extreme end. So the everyday one is, it relates to a story I heard, I think it was from Jack Kornfield. He talked about when he came back from Thailand and he had been trained as a monk, and he comes back, and I think he had a girlfriend in New York or something, and he was impartial to everything. And it drove her nuts because, you know, she'd say, well, what do you want to do tonight? Well, anything you would like to do. You know, there was like no preference whatsoever. And he said he had to kind of learn to sort of fit that impartiality into real life, into the way that everybody else was expecting was normal. So that there's I guess it's not a question, but it's just sort of a trouble figuring out the sweet spot on that one, where that sort of fits in. And then the other one, as I said, is more of an extreme. And that is, where's the line between just accepting and not being partial and things that are patently unreasonable? And I'm glad to hear you say that you've had good conversations with some of your Dharma buddies about this, because I think that's always really been a tough one for me to try to figure out. And I'd love your comments on either one of those or both.
The first one, I think I understood. It's that craving side, the craving, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and then preference. That doesn't necessarily cause suffering. But we can, but of course, we can take the practice to mean that we don't have any preferences. But there's always, preferences can arise and without attachment. I mean, every time you do something, there's a preference that the result you have a certain result, right? There's a preference, otherwise you wouldn't do it. But it doesn't, if you're attached to it, you'll suffer. But if it's just a preference that you hold lightly and it doesn't happen, you try something else. It's the attachment. I think I've told this story before when Matthew asked us to tell us all our favorite ice creams, and we all gave him, Rocky Road and pralines and cream and all these fancy ice creams. We were on a teacher's training, and so we were all drooling as we put voice to our favorite ice creams. And of course, he came back with chocolate and vanilla and Neapolitan and said, well, which one of these? No one had. I think one person had vanilla as their favorite, but it was French vanilla. So this was corner store, Ruckersville, Virginia, vanilla corner store ice cream. But, so the teaching was, yeah, it's fine to have your favorite ice cream, but were you so attached to that you're now suffering because you got chocolate or vanilla? So it's holding those preferences lightly. Now, of course, we can sort of get that teaching wrong. And I think Jack uses that story to make the point that it's not about having no preferences. But we can sort of have that perspective, and, can be kind of, annoyance can arise for those around us. If we're constantly saying, I don't care, whatever, I have no preference. Yeah. The second question, I'm not entirely sure I got it, but is it to do with the difference, the notion of apathy and indifference? I wasn't. Perhaps you could state it.
Yeah, it related to an example that you gave. You said, if you're in a really bad situation, then you get out of that situation. It's not about being so having so much equanimity that you put up with being abused or this sort of thing.
Yeah. So that, I mean, you just answered the question yourself. I mean, you can be open and receptive to the uh, sensory experience of anger, and then from that clear seeing, do something about the situation. Doesn't mean you stay in a bad relationship. You can then do something about the situation. Um, I mean, a really simple. You you know it's you've opened the window to air out the house, and then you sit down to meditate. And it's a cool evening, and you sit down to meditate, and you feel coolness on the skin. You're open to the coolness on the skin. The coolness on the skin turns into there's cold on the skin. Now you're open to cold on the skin. And the body actually starts to shiver a little. Okay. Now do you just sit there and slowly freeze, or do you, right? You take your openness to sensory, you act wisely. You go, okay, I'm open to this coolness on the skin. I realize my body is cold. And you get up and you close the window. Yeah, it would be kind of, yeah. So that's being open to the sensory experience, but at the same time, choosing wise action based on that openness to experience.
So as I think about equanimity and why it's not very present in my life, the thought comes to mind that I'm not okay with all that's arising. I either have a preference or an aversion to it, and this is a mind habit, um, and and I would say when I have aversion, I would say it's I'm fearful. I'm too often, my reflex, my reactivity is around fear. And when I have preference and it doesn't get met, I'm attached and I'm disappointed. And even as I'm saying this, I'm realizing it, that this is a practice that could be very helpful. I'm just realizing this second. That when I am fearful, I can stop and say, I'm fearful. I need to just open to what's arising and accept it, and I'll have more space to act wisely than my reflex all the time. And that actually, I think it's going to be a practice for me to address. I think the fear causes more pain than the disappointment, although disappointment can be pretty powerful too. So thank you for this. I'm having an aha moment. Seriously.
Thank you for sharing that.
All of this discussion has been really interesting, and I particularly was interested in all your comments about fear, because I certainly find that's the hardest thing in my practice to work with, to know how to approach. And so I'm going to be reflecting on what you had to say. I have one question about what you said during the meditation. One thing you had said was, I think you invited us to feel spaciousness in the body and to feel spaciousness outside the body. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that a bit. And I'm wondering exactly what you meant, and what does it mean to feel spaciousness in both of those places? What's the distinction? And anyways.
I wondered if anybody would pick up on that. It's a teaching of awareness being beyond something that is just conceptualized by the mind inwardly, that awareness is a shared consciousness, so to speak. So it's outside it's a spaciousness, it's spacious outside the body as well as within the body. Yeah. There'd be a whole talk there, and you could get into talking about deep absorption states of meditation, but I think it can be touched into in a fairly short meditation practice. Because we keep referring to touching into and sensing awareness itself, that the awareness within which everything is arising and passing away. So what is it that we're sensing into, right? Because it can just be a thought. Sometimes people just picture, oh, there's a little aware. Some people picture an observer, which is fine. I mean, it really depends on kind of where you're at in your practice. But it is in reality beyond each of us, and that's when you talk about interbeing and interconnectedness and so on. This is what it's pointing to, is this shared this spaciousness beyond the body, beyond the mind.
Thank you.
You said that there's a process to learn equanimity. What is that process?
Well, the 7 factors of awakening is one process that you could. I mean, the Buddha gave so many maps, so many frameworks for the practice. It could be the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Eightfold Path. They're all processes that have laid out for us. Those are 3. The 4 Noble Truths. The Eightfold Path is the final, is a wonderful map to developing equanimity. Any of those map. And then I gave 2 examples of things that really helped, really concretely were personally helpful within those. But then those 2 things occur within all the maps. Of course, 3 of the aspects of the Eightfold Path are ethical trainings. So that's bringing it in right there. Yeah, I know I'm not really answering. I'm not giving you a formula. There's just so many processes that are out there. We just did you could go through the 7 factors, just take each one for a period of time and just practice it and really sense into it and get a feel for it, and then move on to the next one and see how you grow through the practice. I've done this in the past with people. I've done 1-year trainings and 2-year trainings where we just step by step, every week I give a practice for people to do, and the idea is for a process to unfold. Much like you would learn to surf or play the trombone or something, right? You would bring people through a process. And it's a skill, right? It's a taste of freedom, but it's not freedom. It's a skill. It's conditioned in that sense. So it is a skill that we can cultivate, or that we can put more precisely, we can create the conditions such that it may arise. To take the I out of it, right? Put conditions in place so that it's more likely to arise as a quality of mind. Because if you get the sense that there's a you that's learning this skill or doing that, then you can get trapped in wanting, the you then wants results, right? And it gets attached to outcome, and it gets all I and me confused. And the ego mind will do that. It'll take over any Dharma project as an ego project. So always have to be aware of that.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I
I thought I'd just offer, when I was on retreat with Sayadaw U Vivekananda, he described equanimity as being there in the middleness.
Hmm.
And that for me has been a very helpful way of looking at what's trying to be achieved. So thanks.
Hi, I just have a.
Oh.
Okay, I'll try again. Yeah, this evening's discussion and talk was very, very helpful. It's something that I've been playing around with for a while, especially the feeling of being passive if I'm not immediately taking action. And near at the beginning, you gave a quote, quite a long quote, and there was things in there that really helped me kind of distinguish what it was and what it wasn't. And I wondered if you had a link, or you could say the name again, because I'd like to kind of be able to go back to that to get a reference point.
Mm-hmm. So it's Shin Zin, Shinzin, Young.
Okay.
And if you Google his name, he's got a book. He's an American teacher, and talks a lot about equanimity. There's a YouTube video interview that's quite interesting. I think
Okay.
I found it when I just Googled his name and then equanimity and listened to this. It's a fascinating interview. Yeah, it's worth, if you're struggling with that, the passivity versus equanimity, then that it would be helpful, I think.
Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Can you hear the loons in the background? No. I'm at a cottage. The background is actually a virtual background, so you just think I'm at home. It's all an illusion.
Wow.
I was wondering about that. Sometimes when you move your hand, there's like a space, a hole around your head where the background disappears. And I was like, what's that going on?
There we are. There's the real background. Magic. Well, I don't know what our next series of talks will be. I'll maybe see what comes up. And again, if you have any suggestions, let me know. Or if you have any suggestions right now, let me know.
One suggestion I would make, just following up on the discussion we had about fear, I would find it very interesting to have a talk about working with fear.
Okay.
Ditto.
Okay. I'll try and experience some fear so that I can talk about. No, fear is everywhere, right? It's kind of the base of fear of death is
Go to the mall.
is behind a lot of what we do in our life. We just don't know it, right? Yeah. Okay, that's what we'll do. I'll put some more, think about that some more and see what comes up. See, there might even be a few talks on it. It's a kind of an umbrella topic, right? Because fear is underlying attachment, right? It's fear of loss of control, fear of there's just so many fears that's why when we open to what's arising, what we often come face to face with is some core fear. So it really is kind of all embracing of this practice is seeing these core fears so that they can be liberated and seen for what they are, with death being kind of the sort of the underlying all of those other ones is the fear of non-existence. Yeah, but I'll see what I can weave together. Given that it's sort of that big, we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
So maybe that's another suggestion then, core fear, but core whatever else is as well, like cores.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Steve. Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Steve.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Very helpful.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Yeah.
Take
Good night.
care.
Nice to share.
Take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.